Right, our feature this week is a discussion with a colleague of Omar's and mine, Andy Kuzyszyn, who works with us at our work that we don't disclose where actually it is. Honestly, somebody with reasonable smarts could probably work it out, but we're not in the business of putting a target on our back or our employers either.
Yep.
Not least because Andy would not be particularly happy with that. Andy leads our incident response function, among other things. Now, Andy, I have one thing to say with this as a part of introducing you. For some reason, Kuzyszyn, I find just a really, really satisfying name to say. I don't know quite
It's
why it is.
it's definitely satisfying if you get it right. That's always the key because I've heard it pronounced in hundreds of different ways. 99.9% of them are incorrect, but you got it
Yeah.
fairly close. You're towards the top end of the correct pronunciation. So
Nice.
kudos to that. That's very impressive.
Thank you, thank you. Well,
Sure.
it is somewhat relevant to something that we're going to talk about a
Mhm.
little bit further on in the segment. But first things first. I mean, give us an intro of you.
Yeah. So, like you were saying, my name is Andy Kuzyszyn. I've been in the industry, cybersecurity industry, for almost 15 years now. At this point, it's been quite a long journey. I've been working at the same place for pretty much all of those 15 years, and I've had a lot of experience and a lot of uh, time in that role and in that position, going from a slightly more technical role as an analyst or as an engineer, all the way up through some of the mid to upper level management within the information security industry. So, given that part of what we've been doing is building and growing the cybersecurity program here, and that is kind of given me a lot of experience with pretty much every facet of cybersecurity. I'm not an expert. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in most of it. I would consider it. I have my own specialties that I enjoy more so than not. Like you had mentioned, incident response and digital forensics is one of those. Penetration testing and red teaming is another. But things like the legal side, the people side, I'm not as well versed. I'm not a people person like some other people that we work with. But I've been doing it for about 15 years. Started off as I said, an intern and an analyst coming fresh out of college. And back then, there wasn't much of a cybersecurity program. Do we talk about the industry that we're in? That's one question. Do we know? Is the industry fair game? Fair game?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
the healthcare industry in general is relatively young when it comes to cybersecurity. And I got into that years ago, and it was still very new. So ever since I started, the team was only about 5 people large. It was a very small team. We've grown significantly since then, and uh, really the thing that I've really enjoyed about it is that the growth of the team, as it were. So, um, kind of rambling a little bit. I apologize, but kind of getting back to the point. I got into the field right out of college. I originally had gone in because I knew I wanted to do something in computers. I wasn't sure exactly what in
Mhm.
computers I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something in computers. As part of my college experience, I kind of jumped around majors quite a bit, all of them computer related. Started off with computer engineering, realized I didn't want to be designing microprocessors, I didn't want to be designing computer systems, and then moved into the cybersecurity field from there. Realized, and I can opine on this a little bit more later, that there's a major problem with cybersecurity education or degrees around cybersecurity in the industry. That still persists today, in that cybersecurity tends to focus in on a lot of the more theoretical and mathematical concepts. It's built by academics. It's not built by individuals who are versed in how cybersecurity is actually implemented in the real world.
Sure.
So I eventually realized, hey, this high level math's not for me. and then I went straight into computer science, but realized that, well, this hacking stuff's pretty cool. So we're going to go ahead and focus in on that. So I focused a lot of my courses around things that I knew would be useful in an enterprise computing environment: databases, web application development in general, and kind of built my skill set from there. And then I lucked into the job that I currently have.
Okay. Yeah. The looking into it, I mean, I think it feels like these days there's significantly more luck required in doing it, because I mean, you said you fresh out of college into the job that you're in now, and that's something that is tough. Yeah, it's tough these days because everybody wants the finished article. That, it's entry level positions with 3 to 5 years worth of experience. Like, hello, dickhead, that's not entry level.
That's exactly right. And especially in something like cybersecurity, which always was traditionally a specialist role. It was always something that you don't go entry level into cybersecurity. You go entry level into your help desk or your field support services, that kind of thing, and you build your way up into a security role. That is, I don't think it's the case as much anymore, but it is definitely still something where cybersecurity is still just kind of like this piece that's tacked onto generalized IT, which is a good thing insofar as it provides a pretty good ramp up and a pretty good base of knowledge for the individuals trying to get into it. But it's a bad thing because it's very unattainable, because you have to do something that you don't like for 3 to 5 years while you gather some experience in your own time to then get into a cybersecurity career. So there's not a really good smooth ramp into the industry right now.
Yeah, it's a weird one because in order to secure the stuff, you have to know how at least some of the stuff works.
Yeah, and that's again, I was going to get into this, but like the gripes that I have with the education system around cybersecurity is exactly that. It's when I was taking my coursework in cybersecurity, when I was doing the cybersecurity degree, mind you, again, this was 15 years ago, so things may have changed. I'm on the board for my old school for the computer science and cybersecurity program. I haven't changed all that much.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of insider knowledge there, but when it comes down to it, back then, cybersecurity was pretty much computer science with some specialty courses. So you were still doing the computer science capstone courses. You were still doing all your programming courses. They basically just told you specifically which electives to take. And those electives, in a lot of cases, would not prepare you at all for work in an enterprise cybersecurity environment. Academia, yeah, absolutely. Your discrete mathematics for cybersecurity, understanding exactly how cryptography works and why it works and the math behind it, that's absolutely great if you're looking to get into academic cybersecurity. It's completely fucking useless if you're looking to get into the industry. Yeah. Nobody has asked me about elliptic curve cryptography and how it works from a mathematical perspective in the last 15 years, which is good because I failed that course anyway. So.
But how would that stack up? I mean, say for instance, you really wanted to push yourself into, say, the cyber tools development.
Sure.
Outside of the academia, that's really the in-industry bit where that's kind of useful. But in terms of defending,
yes. However,
you need to know the nuts and bolts.
The problem you're going to run into with that is a niche within a niche. So when it comes down to it, you building out new cryptographic algorithms, there's a lot of open source stuff that happens, and most of the good work happens on an open source side. So there is the possibility of joining open source projects, but you're not going to get paid for that. So generally speaking, if you're looking for a career in it, you're going to be working for one of the larger tech development teams and firms. Think your NVIDIAs, your Ciscos, your Microsofts, your Apples, etc., building out some of their in-house bespoke cryptographic or encryption solutions. There's not many people that are doing that. There's not many open positions there. So getting there kind of compounds the problem we were talking about before, where there is no entry level into that. Your entry level is very much a case of most of the people that are working on that are, have multiple PhDs in mathematics, as an example. They're not like somebody they just hired straight out of college. So it's a leap.
High barriers to entry, and you're really waiting
very
for the
high
odd
barriers
guard
to
to
entry.
move out. I think sports journalism had that same sort of problem
Mm-hmm.
for like the longest time, and that's why something like The Athletic came about. I mean, they eventually got bought by the New York Times, but they basically were saying like there is so many people who just refuse to retire.
Yep.
We cannot get into it, and they hold all the cards.
Yep, absolutely, and that's why when it comes down to it, like when I'm hiring somebody new, because I've done a lot of hiring, I look at the whole person as opposed to just what degree they have. I don't care if you have a cybersecurity degree. I've hired people that haven't even gone to college.
Mhm.
My hierarchy tends to go, what kind of experience do you have? I'd rather have somebody who has spent the last couple years building out a home lab and performing penetration tests on their own and kind of building out their own, because that means they're passionate about the actual tool set. They know what they're doing. Yeah, they don't have the formal training of a degree, and that comes with its own problems. Don't get me wrong. There is, there could be communication related issues. There could be issues around writing out reports, as an example. There is some, knowledge that's necessary on the enterprise level. But if we're talking just somebody who's a pure pen tester or even a pure incident responder, somebody who's been doing this stuff on their own is very attractive, and it's very much so something. And this is where the industry hasn't necessarily caught up yet. Everybody's still looking for, all right, where's your CISSP? Where's your degree in computer science or cybersecurity? Where's your OSCP or whatever it happens to be? They're important. Certificates are important. They do provide some qualifications or a base level understanding of certain technology and a certain level of experience, not experience, but a certain base level of knowledge is really what it goes down to. But there's a lot of certificate mills out there. I know the what's it called, the Security Plus has had a lot of problems with this, of people just getting. Listen, universities have that problem too, with people just getting rubber stamped degrees. Yep. So I'd rather see and hear somebody who is genuinely passionate about a particular topic talk through how they built their home lab, rather than hearing about somebody's degree.
So that's what I wanted to kind of follow up on, Andy, in terms of then how it's the seeing and the hearing, right? Because there's mentees I have, and this is one of those. One for me trying to break in, one of the things that folks used to hit me with, that now I understand it, right? Being on the other side of the hiring table, sometimes I support you guys. Some, I've been, for other roles. It's where'd you get your news, right? Like kind of tell me. So is it similar where, like, the walkthrough of that environment of the home lab, or is there like a format that you'd want to be able to see it? Do they have to have links on their resume maybe to kind of show you
those are all helpful. I mean, send me to a GitHub page to show that you've done some code and some work around that. That's fine. Give me an idea as to what you do in that lab. I mean, talk me through some of the coolest boxes that you've popped. Talk me through some of the coolest stuff that you've done. And that gives me two things. That gives me, some assurances that you know what you're talking about, because if you can explain it to me, that means you know what you're talking about. And it also gives me a understanding of how you are with communicating certain topics, and that communication and it gives you an understanding into your thought process behind how you would go about doing a scan for potential vulnerabilities, or how would you go about doing an analysis of a box to see if there's any kind of attacker activity. The thought process there is super important.
Absolutely makes sense. And that's one of those things that I think are right, because it's almost like when the internet decides to get bored, right? Or infosec, whatever, infosec Twitter, infosec LinkedIn, whatever. It's certs or degrees, degrees, and it's just, wait a second, like XP, I think rules them all. So I'm glad to know I'm not off.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of like, kind of on that topic, just kind of moving around that. So, cybersecurity, at least in the last little bit, has been a lot of buzzwords. IT in general tends to be buzzwords. You got, 15 years ago, you had, the move to, SaaS hosted solution. SaaS was the big buzzword. Now it's cloud. Now it's machine learning. Now it's AI. There's always going to be some level of buzzwords, but cybersecurity doubly so always tends to be, everybody's looking for that silver bullet because nobody wants to invest in cybersecurity. But, when it comes down to it, nobody wants to be the subject of an attack. So there's a lot of stuff out there that is solutions in search of problems, so to speak. I'm not gonna name any specific vendors or name any specific technologies that I think is the case here, but like the key with cyber is 99.9% of the time you're dealing with people. At its core, the majority of problems in cyber comes from some person causing an issue at its very core. Even if you're dealing with a zero-day vulnerability, something that can't be patched, nobody is aware of, somebody coded that vulnerability. So there's a gap of knowledge of some kind of insecure coding, or a gap of knowledge in selection when it comes to an open source code base to use, or there's some level of there's some human interaction. In the end, it always comes down to a human. And technology can never be the silver bullet to replace that. No matter how much AI or ML or cloud you put in front of it, it's never going to fix it.
3 buzzwords right in a row. Like you're
exactly.
just flexing on people.
My favorite one I've seen recently has been the very last scene from Wolf of Wall Street is to sell me this pen, and the guy just goes, "It's got AI."
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're at. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah. It was even right before AI as well. There was I remember seeing that there's the meme of the girl who's got like a trumpet right, or a tuba right.
Oh, the trumpet.
Right in your
zero
face.
Trust. Zero trust.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's everybody thinks that there is some kind of silver bullet to protect them, and I'm not saying everybody. There's it's boards. Let's be honest. It's boards of directors. It's CEOs. It's the people who don't understand the technology that think there is some kind of silver bullet that can solve this. But in reality, the base level technologies that we've got have gotten so good that we've been living in an era where we've seen the evolution of commercial technologies that don't need to exist. So primary example, and this is more for home users than just for enterprise users. You don't need AV anymore. There's no reason to run Norton, McAfee, Kaspersky. Don't run Kaspersky. Just don't.
Please don't.
Well, we'll get on to that.
I said I wasn't going to call out vendors, but I'll call them out.
That's a safe call out. I think the State Department would back you on that.
Probably, yeah. But from what I'm basically saying is we've seen that evolution of technology to where the base level of a lot of our tech is fairly secure. Obviously you're always going to have 0 days, you're always going to have problems, and as things become more connected, as things become more complicated, those problems will start compounding. But a lot of the stuff that we relied on, again, 15 years ago, if you didn't have AV on every single computer you had, you were screwed. There was nothing you can do. And then attackers evolved to the point where they can bypass AV. Sorry, Robin, go on.
No, I was gonna say, and everybody hated that time of year when it was renew your McAfee, because it was there's another $70-$80 that actually I'm never really gonna see the payoff from, because it's one of those, it's Futurama. When you've done things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all, because it's the preventative nature of it. You only really notice when there's an absence of it, but you always resented paying that $70-$80 per year for that.
Yeah, and 90% of the time when it comes down to it, safe browsing habits, safe habits when it comes to interacting with technology, that'll save you 90% of the time. Yeah, you're always going to have a drive-by download. You're always going to have 0-day vulnerabilities in applications that could potentially impact you. But for the personal user, when it comes down to it, safe browsing habits, Windows Defender, and just really kind of being suspicious always online. Don't assume that anybody on the internet's your friend, and you'll be safe from 99% of attacks. Even some of the worst malware I've seen is not going to get through most of those layers. Some of the worst malware I've seen
I was going to say, what is
yeah.
the gnarliest piece that you've seen?
The worst one that I've seen, this goes back, it was Configure. So, you know, you're not the most, and this is something I've seen in my professional life, because there's obviously dramatically worse, like NotPetya or anything that specifically bricks devices is leaps and bounds worse than something like Configure, which is mostly just a mild annoyance. But any kind of worm like Configure that spreads specifically through network shares, that is such a nightmare to clean up. We're still, you know, to this day, and that Configure attack was 14, 13 years ago. You have backups, cold storage backups of network shares. Still might have a piece of it on there. Granted, it's long since been defanged and it's not really effective. And most of our modern malware, our EDR/ER solutions are going to take care of it and not going to allow it to execute. But it's still there. We still sometimes get detections for it, just coming out of the woodwork. Yeah, it doesn't go away.
The frozen pieces of the Arctic, right? Where there's still
you got frozen viruses, literally frozen viruses in the Arctic. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's less pernicious than it is just persistent.
It tends not to go away, because again, when you're dealing with a large enterprise, you're dealing with data longevity in the decades, and you know, you're not going to necessarily be able to get through it and be able to clean it up properly, especially if you have poor data handling or poor data hygiene processes. So it's rough. It's very much rough, and I only anticipate it's going to get worse. The movement that we're seeing in the industry, again, moving to the cloud, and the advancement of some of these technologies, like, again, AI is going to be the example I'm going to bring up in this particular case. Is within 24 hours of ChatGPT becoming a mainstream name, we already had people asking, hey, how do I use this for sensitive information? We don't have AI experts. Well, we have people that are more versed in AI now, but back then we didn't know what AI was.
But hey, there's certs, Andy. There's certs people can get that tell
so
it's certified.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the certs in that particular case, if you're dealing with a new technology and there is a certification of some kind available on it, I don't give a shit about the certification. Like, I could care less if you earn the cert, but taking the class and learning about it is actually super useful. So we've put some of our team through coursework around AI, around ML, around cloud, around everything throughout the course of, you know, the time that I've had here, and it's been super helpful to kind of get them up to speed, at least at a high level. Are they going to be experts? No. I don't expect them to be experts. The kind of thing about security is you need to be able to be a jack of all trades, master of none. You have to, and especially in the company we work for, where we use everything, every kind of possible technology. You know, I've done pen tests on, you know, medication dispensing cash registers. I've done pen tests on virtual koi ponds. I've done pen tests on it. Long story.
That one got me. I haven't heard about the virtual koi pond. The dispenser I heard about prior.
That was, you know, medical devices, computers, SaaS applications, cloud applications, AI models, name it. We've done some level of testing on it. We're not experts on any of it, but we know enough to break it in a lot of cases.
I guess so. If you know how to break it, you're forced to be in a position where you need to know how to fix it, don't you?
Well, that's the nice part about doing the pen test, is we get to provide them with the results of said pen test, and they get to go to their vendor to try to figure out how they can fix it. We do provide high levels, so we do provide high level guidance as to, all right, here, you know, we found a indirect object reference in your site. Here's some resources and how you can fix it. Good luck. We'll come back to us when you've got it done, and we'll help you validate that it's fixed. And that's one area that still needs a lot of help, and that's going to be around secure development knowledge and training developers on security. It's not done well right now. It hasn't been done well for the last 20 years. I think development boot camps are some of the worst things that have happened when it comes to, you can shit out developers really fast, but the quality of those developers can be hit or miss. And when you're dealing with poor quality developers that just push out code, you're going to be introducing a lot of risk. You're going to be introducing a lot of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So I'm, very much anti-boot camp in a lot of ways when it comes to development.
Even the latest that we've been hearing about AI assisted development. One of the things that's a caveat, right? An admitted caveat, because I think lately the most recent one was Jassy over at AWS. Right, he goes, oh, this saves us 4,500 developer years in the last year of whatever. But one of the caveats, even in like the hype piece that it was admittedly a hype piece, was, yeah, it helps you push out code, but there's still some, you don't know if it's secure code yet. Like it hasn't caught up to that extent. So
there's also the aspect that you start to, and this isn't limited to code development by any means, but the amount of assistance that exists within technology starts to get to a stage where, unless you're forcing people, and this is kind of, I'm talking like, from high school level, you're forcing the kids to learn the fundamentals, because this does end up being a generational problem. Unless you're forcing the kids to learn the fundamentals, then everything that they do, everything that they create, starts to become somewhat of a black box kind of creation process, whereby actually the only people who still know how anything works are the old guard, and once they retire and
that's it,
pass away, then you're sort of screwed, and you have to reverse engineer stuff. Apparently, actually, within things like civil and mechanical engineering and stuff like that, this is actually the problem that Russia are having from in a workforce sort of context.
Just the one problem they're having.
Well, and they're sending a bunch of their young people over too.
I was gonna say, that's a generational issue to talk about too. Like
apparently it does sort of come into kind of military engineering context as well. It's about building the bridges to maintain your supply routes and that sort of stuff. Oh, I forgot briefly where I was going with that. There was the black box piece, and
it's like lost knowledge. Like there's the entire concept of we don't know how Rome made concrete, or the concrete that Rome made. We don't know how Greek fire was originally created. Like we can't recreate those recipes because they're gone. Nobody knows how to do those. That's a very real thing that we're happening, and we're watching that happen in real time. Very much so. There's probably closed source packages that run the majority of the internet written in Fortran that pretty soon nobody's going to know how they work.
Yeah,
it's terrifying. God, like when you think about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that reminds me when I started in general IT, and I sort of fell into cyber. But I remember, and there's probably still some of them around, but guys in their sort of late 50s, early 60s who could command $1,200-1,500 a day, sometimes even in the 2000s, because they knew COBOL. And nobody else did. And it's not what all banking systems work on. It's what all the mainframes are.
And it's the Swift backbone is huge, and it's on all outdated technology. If you look at even, I'm definitely a patriot, but you look at a lot of the governmental technology, even stateside, like a lot of that.
Our nuclear missile silos run on flash drives.
I was about to say, it's 70s IBM stuff, and it's ironically secure because nobody can even.
It's too old to hack.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny though. So because we were talking about AI generated code, I was actually watching something from Proofpoint a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about this very matter, and they said they were talking about threat actor AI created code, and they said, we're pretty sure, you can't be sure for certain, because unless you speak to whoever pumped it out, but they said we're pretty sure that this was AI generated because it is so well commented and so clearly commented. There is no way a human being
developers don't comment their code. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. And that's definitely
just kind of piggybacking off of that, right? Like in terms of AI generated malware, generally speaking, right? Don't want to don't have to reveal how the soup is is stirred here. But are you starting to see out in the wild in your travels? Are you starting to see where that's kind of filtering in? Is it stuff you're seeing a little bit of? And what are your thoughts on just how in general, the sophistication of threat actors is in your opinion?
It's going to depend on the nature of the threat actor. Because remember, every attacker is going to have a different set of motivations, and every attacker is going to have a different set of resources available to them. So, if you're dealing with your cyber criminals, as an example, they're relying primarily on what works: phishing emails, social engineering. They're not going to bother with some sophisticated piece of malware because they don't need to. It's too expensive to develop. What they have works, and that's going to continue to be the case. Now, if that were to stop working, I would start worrying. But where we are going to start seeing a lot of very sophisticated attacks and very sophisticated malware is probably around the cyber warfare front, because that is definitely the next phase in cybersecurity. It's stuff that's until relatively recently been fairly theoretical. But even when we're dealing with, hell, NotPetya was an example of some very sophisticated directed cyber warfare. It's one of the first instances of cyber attack, going back to the Iranian centrifuges.
Stuxnet.
Stuxnet, the Stuxnet virus.
Yeah.
That is cyber warfare. It's only been around for about 10 years. And the one thing that is going to be really interesting in the coming years, and by interesting, I mean absolutely horrifying, is likely where things like the concept behind a nuclear first strike, I think at this point is less concerning to me than a cyber first strike. Nuclear first strike warrants nuclear response. We've been dealing with something like that for 40, 50, 60, 70 years now.
Right. Duck and cover, all that.
We have a lot of that down. We have our second strike capabilities that are completely offline. We have a lot of contingencies in place around that. There's very few contingencies around, what happens if our internet were to shut down, or if our grid were to go down. I can tell you right now, there are, like, when we're dealing with hospitals, knowing what I know about healthcare cybersecurity, there are plans and there are contingencies when it comes to bringing somebody offline, but medical records are all online now. If those were to go away, there'd be a lot of problems. And I've actually seen a demonstration where you had a group of relatively young doctors fresh out of med school, been in the industry for about a year. Their systems went down and they did not know how to fill out a chart on paper. So we have paper backups, but if you're dealing with people that have not grown up, if you have some older doctors that have grew up on charts then switched to EMR, they can jump back a lot easier than somebody who's never seen a paper chart before. So
it is something that kind of worries me, because whenever I've had these sorts of conversations, and I'm not saying that this is in any way specific to where we work, this is most certainly industry wide, but you get senior people that you're talking to, and it's a matter of their age will be at a point where they're probably, at very worst, they were on the tail edge, the modern edge of having to use paper, and then it was very much the digital age for them, but they're familiar with it. And you say, okay, well, this can be a problem, this could be a real generational problem, and they don't seem to think it's that much of an issue. They think because they are prepared as managers that it's all okay, because then everybody else will fall in line. But I think there's a certain amount of empathy that gets lacked there in terms of put yourself in the shoes of kid who literally it is all a black box sort of scenario. How would you feel?
It's difficult, because you as a manager, and again, I try, I don't think I'm unique in this, but I try to keep people as independent as possible. I do this with my wife too. When it comes down to it, I don't want to be the only one that knows how to do things. So whenever I try to do something, I try to teach another person how to do it. Because if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, I don't want anybody that reports to me or relies on me to be screwed. And that's, from a preparedness perspective, that's the one, like, there's preppers out there that are stockpiling cans and water, and it's not a terrible idea. But
really, yeah.
honestly, the transfer of skill set and the transfer of knowledge is the most important part of preparing for something like this. But that's the other thing. There's only so much you can actually put down there. So there's always like, you can't. I'm not going to go through and teach if there is a new modern way of doing something. So if there is a way to solve a problem with technology now that didn't exist 5 years ago, I'm going to be less likely to try to teach somebody how to do it manually, unless it's a very important problem that needs to be solved. So if it's an important problem, you have your primary and then your backups to your backups to your backups to your backups. And, if you can't solve it with this, then move to this. If you can't solve it with that, then move to that. If you can't solve it with that, well, then we're probably all dead anyway, so it doesn't really necessarily matter. So, yeah, that goes for cybersecurity, and that goes for my own ethos in personal life is always have backups and always have plan B, C's, and D's.
And just kind of piggybacking off of that, right? I think, do you having family where you do, right? And do you notice a difference in the preparedness in different areas of the world where, maybe here it's not necessarily we're not as worried about somebody shutting off the heat in the winter, but in other regions of the world, well, that's just something that, that's the new rules of the game. That's part of potential engagements in different regions. Do you notice that there's more of a propensity to prepare, obviously, where they see that a little bit more upfront?
Yeah, because if you're going to see something more often, if your power goes out more often, you're going to get used to living without power.
Sure.
But like when we're dealing with a very connected world, nobody knows how to read a map anymore. So if your GPS signal goes down, which is something that's actively happening as we speak in Europe, Russia is jamming GPS, and it is causing problems with European navigation systems
and shipping.
Big deal. So it very much pays to have backups to certain critical skills. And it's the same thing, like your cities rely on more rural areas for food and for sustenance. They don't ask where the food comes from, but that it's a very interconnected society, both digitally and physically, and not understanding some basic skills is, at least at a high level. I'm not saying you have to go be Bear Grylls, but having at least some level of understanding of how vulnerable you are is important, because I'm not an alarmist by nature, and generally speaking, when it comes down to it, most disasters are over fairly quickly or relatively localized. Like, I'm not saying that there's going to be an end of the world. What was that?
CrowdStrike. That resulted.
Okay, fair. But even so, that was still relatively localized. And it also, as an aside, CrowdStrike handled that perfectly. Honestly, I'm giving them major kudos to the way they handled that entire thing with the PR, and they owned up to it. They're like, this is us. This is something that we did. Let us help you fix it. I think they handled that perfectly. It was on them, so I would hope that they would actually end up handling it perfectly.
What about the Uber Eats stuff, though, Andy? I gotta ask you.
Okay, so I actually got the background to that from a CrowdStrike rep. That was originally something that was put in place for their people, and somebody leaked it online. So it wasn't it wasn't like an actual offer to people.
Okay.
It was an offer to the people that were working overtime on CrowdStrike side to try to figure out what was going on. And it kind of just, spread, because it's meme culture. Ultimately, if it's hilarious, it'll sell, and it'll spread like wildfire. And that memed really well. And it was frankly fucking hilarious. So when it comes down to it, it was hilarious. We've made those jokes several times. So yeah.
There is the Oscar Wilde thing, is like, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
No, ultimately when it comes down to it. And will this end CrowdStrike as a company as we know it? I don't think so.
No. They reported quarterly results yesterday. Mm-hmm. They said it's actually, whether they were glossing over it, they said we expect maybe like a 30 million hit. It didn't hit anything of that quarter's revenue whatsoever. And I remember this. I remember people saying this, or saying, "Oh, the share price is going to tank, and they're going to be in the shit for God knows how long." And I'm sitting there thinking, do you have any idea how difficult it is to unplug an EDR?
Oh yeah,
it's nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and ultimately, their share price did take a hit. I think they dropped 11 or 15% over the course of a couple of days. I don't know if they've recovered. I haven't really kept up on it, but I expect that the majority of the reasons behind not much of a quarterly dip is because long-term contracts. I mean, you're dealing with EDR solutions that have been in place for years. Somebody's not going to tear that out overnight. So what I'd be really curious about is what their quarterly growth looks like this time next year.
Yeah, and see if they kept stepping it up.
Take a look to see what that looks like and what the earnings report looks like. How many contracts didn't get renewed or got canceled because of this? I don't think it's a killer blow. Honestly, again, I'm really impressed with how they handled this situation. I think they handled it extremely well. They were very upfront, very willing to help people. They were putting out reports to help people identify broken hosts. They were keeping people updated. They released an after-action report relatively quickly. I really have to give them, all things considered, given the situation they were in, they handled that extremely well.
Didn't they also have the actual fix for the error, because it was just one corrupt file within the
30 minutes,
update, wasn't it? It was between I sort of remembered between like 10 and 20 minutes or something like that.
They had the error pushed, the error fixed within 30 minutes. The problem was the pushing the fix required you to be online, and if you were stuck in a reboot loop, you couldn't get the fix. So it was kind of like a vicious cycle that was going there, and it was rough. But what I really like about what they did was they didn't just sit on that, say, oh, just keep, the fix is in place. Here's what you do. Have a good day. They iterated on those fixes. They tried to find better ways and more reliable ways to push that fix. Because I think 12 or 18 hours later, they put in a slightly different fix that, because it was a race condition, ultimately, that was the problem. So they actually put something that would help people within the race condition reboot, get out of the boot loop faster. So they didn't just stop at the solution. They tried to find a better solution, and they did a very good job communicating. They did a very good job offering assistance. Not everybody took them up on their assistance, Delta.
But that's a contract that's not getting renewed.
Yeah. Well, probably a pretty big contract too, but not everybody took them up on it. But again, all things considered, given the enormity of what they've gone through, I think they handled it very well. I'm very impressed with them as a company. So kudos to them for doing that.
There you go, from somebody who's used it day in, day out. So just actually pivoting from that, because that was one of those things where, yes, it was an accident, but it's totally, I mean, we pray to God that it wouldn't happen, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility for somebody to find a particularly vulnerable part of a system. I'm talking like APTs, like the Russian state, the Chinese state, and just lob a grenade in there and cause absolute chaos. That's as you said before, it's a first strike sort of thing, and NotPetya was that realistically with Ukraine. Now we mentioned Ukraine because you're Ukrainian by heritage, are you not?
That's correct. Yeah, 100%. Both sides of my family come from villages within 100 miles of each other.
Wow.
Nice. So do you have? I mean. So do you have family still over there then, and they're under the cosh with regard to the current conflict? Or?
So nobody specific that I know. We have a big family. My grandparents came over in the 50s, so right after World War II. My grandfather was 12 or 14 when he came over. So it's still they were involved in a lot of the back and forth between the German and the Russian invasions. I was
gonna say
they were smack in the middle of it. Because they're from Western Ukraine, is where my family, all of my family is from Western Ukraine, right in the Lviv region, and it's very much a byway for both the Nazis going one direction and the Soviets coming the other direction. And when the Soviets started coming this direction, my family started going running away, and they ended up in camps for a little while, and then they ended up emigrating into the United States after that was done. My grandparents have siblings. All of them are here. My great grandparents have siblings, have never met them. A lot of them stayed behind. It's very likely that I do have family over in Ukraine. I don't know them though. Obviously we have a lot of family friends that are both living there and actively fighting for Ukraine over there. We have, people that we know, friends, acquaintances, family that have gone over there either as part of the Legion or as part of private military groups or as part of just in advisory roles. So we have some people that are over there. I haven't lost anybody as of yet, but it's pretty hellish over there. So yeah.
Well, I'm hoping for a swift end to it, but so
it hasn't been swift, but
it's been a lot longer than the 3 days.
Well, it's been a lot longer than it's a lot longer than 3 days to Kyiv. So I'm very, very impressed with that. They're putting up a hell of a fight, and I'm very proud of them.
Yeah, the counterinsurgency too. Like I've been watching that on my Reddit boards is my source, right? I'm on non-credible defense a lot, just because
non-credible defense is one of my favorite boards.
The memery is unparalleled there.
It's awesome.
It really is great. But from what you've seen, right? You're close to it. What's some of the, like, I'll use the phrase Robin used. What's some of the gnarlier stuff you've seen, like from a cyber perspective, or just innovations, on engagement on that front?
The use of drone warfare is really interesting, and it's been something I've been following very closely. I wouldn't really call it on the cyber front because we're still really talking the kinetic side.
Sure.
But a lot of that relies on internet connectivity. A lot of that relies on technology of some kind. So I'm going to go ahead and count it. The use of, this is the first major drone war. Drones are being used constantly, and it's resulted in an uptick in jamming technologies and technologies around drone warfare. On top of that, it's a really big social media war.
Yeah.
This is the first major pure conflict where they're targeting artillery strikes based off of social media posts. You have Russians or you have Ukrainian soldiers posting things on social media. I think there was an instance last year where there was or earlier this year, my sense of time is gone, where there was a graduation ceremony, I believe it was, or an officer or an officer promotion ceremony where there was a large number of Russian troops in attendance, and somebody had posted it on social media, and Ukraine managed to strike it with artillery and killed a large number of people. So operational security in the era of social media and the internet is becoming very important, because it's really not hard to, even without geolocation, because this was a problem back in OIF and a few of the other, the wars on terrorism, where you would have Facebook automatically geotagging posts. And if somebody posted something, it would geotag exactly where they were. And people were tracking units of the United States Army based off of their Tinder profiles, as an example. That's kind of gone the wayside, but you can use technologies to and open source intelligence to geolocate posts very frequently. The Oryx blog actually does this for military equipment losses, where they will take pictures from social media of destroyed Russian, Ukrainian tanks, drones, vehicles, airplanes, and based off of the imagery in the area, locate it to a specific point and validate the loss. So there's a lot of work that can be done around that open source intelligence, and that is terrifying. And it may not be something that is relatively well known, but it's definitely something that's being used actively, and it is definitely costing lives on both sides.
And I could see where it could change the game in terms of then that gets like folded into just tactics elsewhere, right?
When it comes down to it, intelligence is what wins wars, and wherever you can get intelligence from, whether that be from reconnaissance troops on the ground, whether it be from satellites or from spy planes or drones, or from somebody posting social media posts, and the Russians are very good at doing that. They're very good at soliciting and scouring social media and gathering that kind of information.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Vladdy Boy's been saying with regards to the counteroffensive from the Ukrainians is get off your dating apps and turn off the CCTV, because that's being a source of intel for the Ukrainians.
Absolutely. And do I think the United States has anything to do with it? Was the question you didn't ask? Yeah, they probably do, but they're not going to admit it. But Russia has a very, 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 very strong and prolific cyber apparatus, both from a state-sponsored side and from a state-sponsored and criminal organization side. So they can hit it from a number of different places. Yeah. It's one area where they very much so excel, especially over Ukraine, which doesn't really have that kind of apparatus in place.
Yeah.
I can see, I can kind of predict that within the next 5 or so years, there likely will be some level of major cyber warfare attack on the West. I'm kind of waiting for it at this point because I think it's inevitable at this point. Yeah. You have the benefits of deniability in a lot of ways. You don't know necessarily. You can't necessarily prove that Russia did it, but you kind of have the assumptions.
You don't know whether it was the Kremlin. You don't know whether it was Pyongyang, Beijing, Tehran.
So you have the benefit of deniability, but you have the potential for large scale impact. And even if it's not a direct cyber attack, we could be dealing with physical attacks. I know there are there's some chatter that I've seen relatively, I think literally today, where there has been exercises around what would happen and contingency plans for what would happen if the undersea communication cables between us, the EU and the United States were cut. This is something that Russia has done, not the communication cables specifically, but they've bombed pipelines. Correct. Yeah. So they've demonstrated the capability to do something like that, and I think it's a very real possibility that something like that could potentially happen. So, and then it goes back to that doesn't just affect the military. It doesn't just affect. It affects every industry across the board.
Life.
Yep.
In the region.
Yeah. Yep. The there's two bits here actually. There's kind of related questions that I want to ask there is because you mentioned the social media war kind of as it were and how powerful that is because morale and hearts and minds and all that sort of stuff. How much do you think people are kind of sleeping on how much Russian influence there potentially is on social media platforms, like people who look just like that they could be completely legit, but in actual fact it's sort of Russian comment or troll farms, or not even Russian specifically, just other nation state kind of troll farms behind it, just seeking to sow discord and get everybody sort of at each other?
So I think whether or not people are sleeping on it's not really the question. I think the question is whether people can get out of their own echo chambers long enough to realize that the source of the echoes in their chamber is coming from somebody specifically looking to incite and rile you up. Objectivity is a very difficult thing nowadays, and keeping objective with, especially when it comes to algorithms pushing specific content, because obviously remember you're dealing with organizations and corporations that are designed around getting the maximum amount of ad revenue from a specific person, squeezing the maximum amount of ad revenue out of a specific person. They're going to tell you, and they're going to try to get you to engage with stuff that they know you're going to keep watching. So that is absolutely something that can and is being manipulated by all nation states. I'm not saying this is just the U.S. is absolutely doing this in a lot of ways too, but it is that information war and pushing those kinds of specific topics to individuals is absolutely something that people need to be on the lookout for. Objectivity is key. Don't get your news sources from, and my parents have this problem all the time, is they go to one news source.
Yep.
That's it. Yep. And I'm not saying I don't have my own biases. I always, every human being by their very nature have their own biases, but at the very least do some opposition research.
Yeah.
Go. If you're going to get news from one source, get news from two sources and average them out and meet somewhere in the middle.
My favorite one recently has been, because there's a lot of, with the election coming up and whatnot, there is an awful lot of, oh, this is so biased in one direction or another. It's like, well, yeah, news outlets are allowed to be biased. There's nothing to say that they have to be absolutely straight down the middle, impartial, unless they're like NPR, and even then they don't quite manage it.
Yeah.
The funny one I always see in the UK is like I have half the number of people back home say, oh, the BBC is lefty woke trash, and the other half of it saying it's right-wing bootlicking garbage. And I go, if you are saying that in equal number, then it must actually be pretty centrist.
Yeah, and ultimately what it comes down to is your what you're taking out of it is based off of your own biases.
Yeah, it's your own position.
Yeah, it's your own. And that's why when it comes down to it, it's very much a case where don't get your news from one source. And listen, I'm guilty of this too. I spend way too much time on TikTok. And yes, I'm a cybersecurity person who uses TikTok.
That's a hot take right there. There
it is a hot take. It's addicting. The doom rectangle has its hold on me.
It's built to be, though.
It is. It is absolutely built to be. I would say that the majority of what I have on TikTok is cooking and home improvement related. So
nice.
Okay, I'm fine with that. But
yeah,
when it comes down to it, it's dangerous, and it is something that I would urge people to make sure that when you think about something, when you see a point or when you come to a conclusion, don't snap to that decision. Critically think about it. Chances are the person that you are voting against isn't the literal spawn of Satan and doesn't actually bathe in infant blood. Yes, it's hyperbolic, but I guarantee you there are people out there that believe that, and their echo chambers believe that, and that the belief is continuing to spread and continuing to boil, and it'll get to the point where you're talking to somebody who is irrational and won't actually think of anything else because this is all they've heard. So before you get to that point, just try to think through it
and
remain objective.
That's what always, because marrying into the family I married into, right? It was a different side of the coin.
Yeah.
But and then sometimes some of my old friends would ask me like, "Hey, how do you talk to those people?" I'm like, the same way I'm talking to you. Because the thing that always just kind of rolls in my head is the discourse is good as long as it's measured and as long as it's fair, right? Let's chat, because it's, you have to realize, hey, you're still talking to another American across the versus, right, where maybe some of those, pointed, nuanceless messages, that reinforcement of the echo chamber is coming from, right? To circle it back to Robin's point, like, come on now.
Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I'm very much so a First Amendment absolutionist. You're entitled to your own opinion. I'm entitled to punch you in the face for your opinion.
There you go.
But at the same time, I'm also going to question your opinion if you come at it without fact and without like if you're the one making the point and making the statement, it's on you to prove it. And if you don't come to me with proof, I'm not going to believe you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest irritations on online discourse is somebody makes a claim. Somebody says, that's not true. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, okay, then prove it. You go and do your own research. I'm not going to do it for you. It's like, sorry, you're the person who made the claim. You're the one
that made the point originally. Where's your evidence? It's problematic.
Yeah, and I always end up seeing that, or I always end up thinking that do your own research for so many people somewhat reductively ends up getting translated into just succumb to your own confirmation biases, because that's what people do. They just look for things that will round out their own worldview that they already have anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Final one. And let's go controversial, bit of a bombshell, because we already talked about TikTok.
Sure.
TikTok being owned by ByteDance and ByteDance's supposed connections to Beijing, problem or not?
I thought it was Taiwanese.
It's
the CEO is Taiwanese, isn't he?
TikTok's based and registered in Singapore.
Singapore, that's it.
And he's Singaporean, but then ByteDance has the controlling stake in TikTok, and ByteDance are the guys who own Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok, which is a very different tone to TikTok.
There's a lot of layers to that onion, and when it comes down to it, is there the potential for something like TikTok as being as prolific as it is, being used as a surveillance apparatus? Yeah. Would it be dangerous if it was used as a surveillance apparatus? Absolutely. It would be potentially devastating. Is it being used as a surveillance apparatus? I don't think so. When it comes down to it, a lot of the stuff that TikTok would be gathering is very similar to the information that Google, Facebook is already gathering about you.
And monetizing.
It's really no different. When it comes down to it, if you know, I would love to take a look at what some of those companies are doing with the data that they collect about me, and if that's going to the Chinese government or a shell company of some kind. The data is, assume you are already compromised. That's like, assume you are already compromised. Assume that somebody knows everything there is to know about you already. I don't think the problem is with TikTok. I don't think the problem is with any one specific company. I think the problem is with the monetization of the internet as a whole and how it has grown into you are just a target for advertisers and content creators to push specific and whatever's going to be pushed to you is going to be something that is specifically designed for you to consume. I don't think, and to that point, I don't think there is some sort of broad plot by Beijing to manipulate what is being shown to you to push you one way or another. I think the danger is if the app could potentially be used as a surveillance device, which again, Siri already does that. So does, you know, all of our various different smart devices that I'm not going to name because they're going to activate everywhere. It's already happening, and it's domestic companies that are doing it. Like, I'm not worried about TikTok. I'm more worried about Amazon, Microsoft, less worried about Apple, but Amazon, Microsoft, Google. Google got rid of Don't Be Evil a very long time ago, and that should be telling.
And they were quiet about it as well. All right. On that bombshell, we will leave it there. Thank you, Andy, very much for joining us with this.
Thank you for having me, and if something else comes up, you know where to find me.
Hey, look, a few months down the line, whatever, you know, there's plenty of podcasts to have their guests back. We'd be delighted to have you back because this has been really fun.
Sounds good. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, guys.
Good stuff. Thank you, Andy.